Welcome back, everyone. Our second speaker is Dr. Ignazio Graziosi, who is an assistant professor in Warnell School of Forestry at University of Georgia. Dr. Graziosi studies tree health and raises awareness of the benefits provided by trees. As a field biologist, he has studied the impact of invasive insects and microorganisms on tree health and used this knowledge to develop management and surveillance tools while engaging land managers and the public in education programs. In his early career as a forester, he focused on the management of natural and urban tree resources. Dr. Graziosi has held positions with non governmental and governmental organizations, universities, and private companies in different countries. His work involves field and laboratory studies, data collection and analysis, development of protocols, use of photography, team project and partnership coordination, capacity building, education, and outreach. And Dr. Graziosi, the floor is yours from Italy.
Thank you, Bodhi. Good afternoon, everybody. Give me 1 sec that I'm gonna click the magic button. All right, can you hear me all right and see my screen?
Yeah,
Yes.
Fantastic. Okay, it's great to
looks
be here.
perfect.
Thank you again. So we are all dealing with a variety of different tree pests. You can see on the screen a couple of examples. There is a woolly adelgid. We have fall webworm, caterpillar, beetles, scales, and we tend to concentrate on the pest itself because it's what produces damage to our trees. But it's important to remember that is always a team result. We have the pest, yes, but there are other actors in the picture that cause the overall damage. Of course, we have the tree itself, and we have the environment. And the damage on the tree, the damage from the pest and from the disease is caused by the interaction of these three components. And this is the concept of the disease triangle. So the damage is not caused by just one component. The pest alone is not enough, but is the interaction with the tree, which for example, is susceptible, and the environment. And we are dealing with trees, especially in the landscape, for the focus of this webinar, and in urban environment. And in those environments, the situation gets worse. And I introduced to you the death spiral of tree decline. And this is a diagram that was developed in the 90s and is really useful to understand this concept one step more. So how does this diagram work? So you see three different levels of spirals. Each spiral is a family of factors that add stress to the tree at different level. A lot of those are similar to the stressor that Dr. Klein presented at the beginning of his presentation. And all these different family of stressor, they end up eventually with the death of the tree. And you see at the center of the death spiral, there is in fact the death of the tree. And if we look at those three spirals one by one, we can see, for example, the first one that is called the predisposing factors, general stressor. The urban environment, of course, is stressful for the tree. There is the genetic potential of the tree itself. And again, it's a demonstration that the disease triangle is really important. And then we have well-known stressor like soil compaction, which is often the number one issue for many trees. And then we have another spiral that is closer to the center of our death spiral, which is called here inciting factor. And we have defoliating insect, for example, we have drought. And then we have an even more internal spiral, which is contributing factor. And you see a lot of biotic factor. You have fungi, wood-boring insect, nematode, armillaria, for example. The important thing to understand of this diagram is that each of the spiral, the predisposing factor, the inciting factor, and the contributing factor contain factors that can directly bring the tree to death. If you see, I'm not sure if you are able to see my pointer that I'm using on the screen.
Yes, we are.
Fantastic. Thank you, Bodhi. And you can see these lines here. These lines means that each of these factors, for example, urban environment alone or soil compaction alone, are able to cut through the different layer of the spiral and bring the tree directly to death. One important message to take home from this diagram is that the health of the tree and potentially the death of the tree is an interaction between many factors. And if we go back to our slide visualizing different pests that we have to deal with, we have here non-native pests. We have example of native pests. We have example of native trees, an example of also exotic trees. And understanding the interaction among those native pests attacking native trees and vice versa, non-native attacking native and native attacking non-native is really important because allow us to understand the mechanism and to understand what are the general strategies we can use to manage and control those pests. And this is true for many different pests. So I'm bringing to you 3 examples, 3 stories, if you want, that investigate, explore different scenarios and present to us some important component of this interaction that will help us to deal in the future with a variety of different pests. So the first one, the first example, the first story for you is a native tree impacted by non-native pest. And this is the very famous case, the superstar of insect pest, the emerlash borer. So the emerlash borer, I'm sure many of you are familiar with it. On the picture on the left is a canopy dieback caused by the insect. And remember, when you see canopy dieback caused by the emerlash borer and you identify the problem to be that, the emerlash borer, that means that the insect has been spreading in the area for at least 5 to 10 years. And then you see on the right, that is the damage at a stand or forest level. So a very quick summary of what is the EAD, emerlash borer, about. So larvae feed under the bark and doing so disrupt the phloem, the cambium, the outer xylem, and it cuts off the movement of nutrient and water. And trees, they can die very fast. This is an overview of how the damage happened. And if you start from the picture on the left, you see a young tree that is debarked, and you see the gallery caused by the feeding larva, and you see that the tree is desperately trying to sprout as a reaction to the attack. And the water sprout are actually a very important diagnostic feature in order to understand if a tree is attacked by the emerlash borer. And if you get closer to the tree, you can actually see the larvae, like here, that is feeding. This is a 4 instar, is a mature larva, is probably around 2 inches long. And by feeding is basically disrupt all the cambium tissue and the outer xylem. And then after the larva completed the larva development, which is usually at the end of the season, it folds in a J shape and gets a little bit deeper in the outer wood, and it starts kind of sleeping and overwinter is called J larva or pupa. And then at the end of the winter, pupate and emerge in spring. You can see the shiny green beetle that is emerging from a tree. And while it emerges, it leaves through a very characteristic, the famous D-shaped exit hole. This is another way to represent the life cycle of the insect. We can start from here, where the insect again comes out from the tree, leaving the D-shaped hole, and then mate. Female lay eggs in the crack of the barks. From the egg, a larva hatch, goes through the bark and start feeding and causing the gallery you already seen on the previous photos, and then pupate and will emerge again the following years. Here it is important to remember that this is usually mostly a one generation per year insect, but there is always a part of the population of the emerald ash borer in any location that requires 2 years instead of one to develop. And this is true especially in the northern part of North America, where temperatures are lower. As we know, temperature usually increase the development of insects. And so the colder it is, the slower it develops. So at northern latitude in North America, the emerald ash borer, a larger part of the local populations of emerald ash borer require 2 years to develop. And this is important to know when we have to deal with this insect to control it. It was discovered in 2002 in Detroit area, which means, again, as I pointed out earlier, that was present in the area already at least for 10 years. And then you see all the little red dots. Yes, it took North America, as we know, by storm. This is one of the last available map from USDA. This is 2023, because in 2021, I believe, the quarantine was lifted at federal level. It was lifted because there was no hope to contain the insect to quarantine. And the invasion of North America by the EAB was caused by one single individual cause. There was one culprit that allowed the EAB to move so quickly all over the United States. And I let you guess, and you can write your answer if you have an idea in the chat box. I will not be able to see it right now, but I will go later and check. And this is, of course, firewood. Campers and travelers, they move infested firewood to the next city, to the next county, to the next state. And this really is what determined a lot of the pathways of the invasion in North America. They were able to connect very closely the pattern of the spread with the highway and freeway system. There is one good thing that came out from this disaster, which is the Don't Move Firewood campaign. This is a very effective and important campaign that helped, for example, contain other invasive insects, such as the Asian longhorn beetle. Okay, so we know that as the EAB spread in North America, attacked and impacted heavily the native species of ash. In Georgia, for example, there is, of course, the emerald ash borer. This is a spread, is, I would say, the southern edge of the invasion, so it's still spreading. This map is from 2023, so there is active surveillance, is present in the Athens area, of course, and even a little bit southern. So you may think that is not very important, is not as important fighting against the emerald ash borer in Georgia comparing to other states. It's true, there are other states where there is a continuous presence and availability of ash, and Georgia is more scattered. But if we start looking at the distribution of ash species in Georgia, we see that is really important for biodiversity, and actually the state hosts multiple species of ash. We have green ash statewide. We have blue ash, which is an interesting tree because it shows a little bit of resistance against the emerald ash borer. It will die eventually, but it'll take way longer compared to other species of ash. We have white ash, Carolina ash, which is a southern ash. We have Biltmore ash, which is a subspecies of white. You have pumpkin ash on the southern part of the state, swamp white, and small ash. And then there is another plant that unfortunately is important for the ecology of the emerald borer, and is a surprise that happened in 2014 when they discovered that the EAB was able to, we say, expand his host range and attack a native plant in North America, which is the white fringe tree, which is the same family Oleaceae of ash. And this is present also in Georgia. It's important to know that because not only it could be a damage for the white fringe tree, but more importantly, the white fringe tree could function as a reservoir for the population of the EAB, even though all the other ash trees in the area are gone. So the EAB can stay in an area utilizing the white fringe tree. Okay, so we know that the EAB is non-native, and we know that it's from Asia. So if we look at the map where it was in Asia and where it is now in North America, spreading and causing damage, we may ask, how did it get there? Of course, we know through trade. This is a photo from in the port of Savannah, and we know that is of accidental introduction through trade of non-native species is not a new trend, but is an exponential increasing trend. And you can see here an example from different parts of the world. So it is really exponentially increasing. One reason is that our ability to detect species has increased as well, improved. But trade is increasing, of course, and the introduction of non-native species is reflecting this globalization. If you go near potential port of entries, such as airport and port, you may notice traps. This is a generic trap in the port of Savannah. This is another example, since we are talking about the EAB. This is the trap that is designed to catch the EAB. Is a series of interconnected funnel. There is a pouch, which is the green pouch there, that is a lure that produce an attractant for the EAB. The EAB arrived, hit the funnel, and it fall in the cup. So this type of traps, they are not designed to catch as many beetles as possible to remove them from the environment. It's just a detection, but it's a very important detection methodology. Okay, we know of the damage. As the EAB spread in North America, it caused immense damage to the native population of ash. And we have another tool here I want to present to you because it's a useful tool to understand the strategy to manage non-native and native pests alike, which is the invasion curve. This is a diagram that illustrates the growth of a population of a pest, which here is called pest prevalence, over time. So the story starts with the introduction when the pests arrive in the area. So the introduction, of course, after the introduction, the population of the pest, the prevalence is still low. And then start growing, start multiplying and feeding on the host. And then it enters exponential growth. And this is when land managers, for example, start to be aware. And it needs a little bit more time before the public start to be aware. And by the time the public start to be aware, usually the population is already really high until it reaches a plateau, which is the so-called carrying capacity. What is that? For example, is where or when all the ash trees in the area are gone. So the population of the pest cannot grow anymore. This diagram is important because it can be connected with our ability to deal and control the pest. When the population is really low, right after the introduction, we can even try to eradicate a pest. Of course, it's very difficult, but in some cases, for some pests, it's not impossible. We can do prevention, for example. But then as the pest prevalence start to grow, is really impossible to eradicate. And then the only control that is possible is a local control. For example, just trying to save individual trees. But as the prevalence and the difficulties of controlling a pest grows, the cost associated with the control grows as well. And this is really important to understand. And this is why detection is so important. And ideally, we want to have effective tools to detect a pest as close to the introduction event as possible, because everything is easier and is possible. Okay, so as we understand how an invasion works, we can look at the map again and we can ask ourselves, okay, we know that the emerald ash borer is non-native, is from Asia and is a pest here, but what about in its native range? What about in Asia? Was a pest? The answer is no. And there are multiple reasons for that, and they will relate to our disease triangle. We will see that. The first reason is that the native species of ash in Asia, they say co-evolve with the pest, which means they are less susceptible or resistant. And the only ash trees, Asian species of ash trees, that can be attacked by the EAB in Asia are very weak and stressed trees. That's one important reason. And this is why the low susceptibility and the resistance, this is why one of the approach to control the EAB is to artificially make a tree resistant through chemical protection. Of course, this is just a visual summary of the technology that I'm sure you are familiar to. There is tree injection, bark spray, and soil drench. I want to give just a little flash and overview of the chemical control methodology for the EAB. And there are few involving systemic insecticide. Some of them, they can be applied by homeowner. Some of them, of course, they need a professional applicator. And you have to choose carefully which one depending on the season. For example, soil drench need to be applied in the spring before leaves are out. I leave you here two QR code. I encourage you to check them. One is an overview of the state, the status, and the control of the EAB in Georgia. And the one on the bottom, on the left, is the full protocol for insecticide control for the EAB. Okay, we are still trying to answer our question, why is not a problem in Asia? One reason is the trees are resistant, but there is another reason. The other reason is that the population of the EB there is kept in check by a community of natural enemies. These are predators, are parasitoids, and we will see later what is a parasitoids that are able to attack the EB and to keep the population low. Okay, so why don't we bring them over? That's exactly what we did. And this is called importation biological control, where you go there, you study the natural enemies that are effective in the native range, and you bring them over. USDA did that after risk assessment and introduced few different species. And you see here 3 tiny wasps. And Those wasps are parasitic wasps or parasitoids. The first two, the one on the left and the one on the center, they attack the larvae of the EAB. The one on the right attacks the eggs. And those are specialists. What means is that they only attack the EAB. They don't attack any other insect. And so this warrants success in a way because they cannot start attacking another insect and can kind of waste their potential. How do they work? Okay, let's start with the first one here, the one on the left. And you see it's a small wasp and has a kind of a long tail. This tail is an ovipositor and use this ovipositor to find trees that are infested with the EB and drill through the bark, is able to use vibrational cues to understand if there is a larva under the bark and exactly where it is. And it stings the larvae of the EAB and it puts eggs, its own eggs, in the larvae. Think about the movie Alien. Alien 1, not Alien 3, because the life cycle in Alien 3 gets very complicated. But in Alien 1 is exactly how it works. Inside, there will be the larvae of the wasp that feeds in the body of the larvae of the EAB, eventually consuming the whole larvae. The infographic that you see on the slide is the technology that is used to release it. This is a log prepared in the lab that is filled with larvae of the EAB infested with the parasitoid wasp. You hang them on a tree. The adult wasp, they will eventually fly out and find other trees infested with the EAB to parasitize. The second one is the egg parasitoid. I think you know the story now. It works exactly the same way, but it attacks eggs. The technology is a small container. You can see in the picture on the bottom right here is a drugstore container. It's called the Obinator. It contains a paper where there are eggs of the EAB that have been parasitized with his parasitic wasp. Look now at the picture in the center. These brown circles are the eggs of the EAB. If you look at the one on the bottom, you can see that inside there is actually a tiny baby larvae of the EAB that is waiting to hatch. But if you look at the other one, at the other two, the dark ones, you see that inside there is something different. That is the wasp that is ready to emerge. Okay, so we understand about biological control now, the importation biological control, but you may ask, okay, so we are in North America. What about our native natural enemies? The answer is yes, we have some. There are many species that have been described of parasitic wasp or other type of insect, but those are not specialists. They can attack also other type of insect. So they are not effective in providing, they cannot be the only one that can provide control. Alone, they are not enough. So at the end of the story, what we want to reach for the EAB, and in general for many non-native pests attacking native trees, is a balance. Is a balance between the susceptibility of the plant and the community of natural enemies, both native natural enemies and also biological control. But also in the picture, there is also the chemical protection that is really important, especially to save trees of great value. Because it's true that biological control in North America for the AB hasn't been fully successful yet, but we can still save large trees of big value in the city and the landscape using chemical protection. Okay, so we are ready for our second example. A non-native trees that is attacked by a non-native pest. And this is an example that may be relevant for us in the south, which is the crepe myrtle bark scale. So the crepe myrtle bark scale, you can see here in the center, is, of course, a non-native scale attacking our beloved crepe myrtle. There is a huge crepe myrtle culture in the south. There are hundreds, I think, of different cultivars belonging to different species. Is not only Lagerstrenia indica, but there are hybrid of different species, different color of flower, texture of the bark, size, and of course, it's easy to be judgmental toward the crepe myrtle because it's so commonly used, and you can say it's used too much. It's true. It's easy to be judgmental, but it's important to remember a couple of things. One is that crepe myrtle, they provide benefit. And you can see here a little report that has been prepared using this tool called iTree. If you are not familiar with the iTree, is a suite of different tools that they can be extremely useful to calculate benefit, so-called ecosystem services of trees, but also can be used to select the right tree for the right place. The second reason is that regardless of how much the crepe myrtle is planted in the south, we have to deal with this pest because it will create damage. We will have to deal with removal of attacked trees or the control of the pest itself. Okay, so the Crapemyrtle bark scale, starting from the picture on the left. This is a twig of a crepe myrtle. Of course, you see the white specks. Those are individual, mostly female of the crepe myrtle bark scale, CMBS in short. Why is black? Because like aphids, of course, scale, while they feed, they secrete droplets of sugary sap. And so black sooty molds, they grow on that. On the picture in the center, different things. Those white lumps are mostly mature females of the scale, but you can also see here immature female nymphs. And this is important for the life cycle. On the right, you see a female, and if you flip the female, you see the eggs. Those very nice pink color are eggs. The life cycle involves, so they have both males and female. The male is actually winged. The female is not winged, and a mature female loses legs and cannot move. One of the things complicated the control is that it's not clear how many generations there are. They describe up to 5 generations, but the problem is that they are overlapping. So at one point, at any point, you may find different stage of the insect. If I go back one slide, the picture in the middle here has been shot 1 month ago in Athens, so in the winter. And you can see there are nymphs and adults. The nymphs are called crawlers. Okay, what is the situation? Was found in 2004 in Texas, of course, huge crepe myrtle culture state, and then in 2014 in Georgia, and only in 2019, unfortunately, was found in nursery in Georgia. The QR code I put there is a summary of the status and the biology of the crepe myrtle bark scale from UGA. So if you're interested, please snatch that. Okay, so we already know the invasion curve, what it means, and it's really important for the crepe myrtle bark scale, even though it's already present in the south, even though it's already present in Georgia, to be able to detect it as soon as possible. It's not everywhere yet. In Athens, it got there, I think, in 2021. And you can see it in high number for some trees, but there are a lot of trees, they have a very low infestation. So I would say we are at the beginning of the invasion in a lot of places in Georgia. So we are in the situation where we can do well because we are at the point on the invasion curve where the population is not so high again that our control can mean something. All righty, let's go back to our well-known map. So we know that it is a non-native, come from Asia. So we may ask, okay, what about the host there? The bad news is that this insect in native Asia can feed on many different species of plant. It's not a specialist, so it can feed on apple in Asia, and soybean has been found on fig. One good news is that since there are so many, so they were able to find some cultivar, some species of Crapemyrtle that has a low susceptibility, and for example, the species Lagerstroemia speciosa. They are studying these still, though. Okay, so those are the plants in Asia. What about the plants in North America? We know that attacks basically most of the cultivar of the crepe myrtle, but unfortunately, like the EAB was able to find the white fringetree, the crepe myrtle bar scale start to feed happily on American beautyberry and also Count St. John's wort. So and this can be a problem, of course, because it kind of go around attacking other plant. Okay, we are familiar with the disease triangle, so we may ask, okay, what about the role of the environment? What is the role of the environment here? Unfortunately, again, scales are one of the group of insects that most take advantage of urban heat island. Urban heat island, of course, is the phenomenon that causes temperature due to hardscape in the city to be even 10 degrees higher. And this has two effects. First of all, it stresses trees and they become more susceptible to pests. Second, it accelerates the development of the insect itself. And scales are very good in taking advantage of that. Okay, let's go to some good news, the tools, the weapons we have to control it. So this is an overview, again, of the chemical control available for the Crapemyrtle bar scale. We have soil drench, we have soil injection, we have foliar sprays, and also some soaps. They can be used mostly to target crawlers, which again are the young nymphs, like the pinkish one in the photo here. Okay, you can see in the table different product brand names and how they can be applied. And I encourage you again to snatch that QR code because we'll give you the full protocol that you can use. The chemical control is complicated by the fact that crepe myrtle is not good in absorbing systemic insecticide through trunk injection. The chemical moves very slowly, so that is not a viable option, unfortunately. Okay, we know about natural enemies, so we may ask now, looking at our map, what is the situation for this pest? Yes, in Asia, there is a healthy community of predators and parasitic wasps that worldwide and in Asia can attack. In the US, they were not able yet to clearly find an effective parasitoids, but there are many predators that can feed on the Crapemyrtle bark scale, and they are used to try to control it. So this is another question for you. If you know what is this, please write it in the chat box. Okay, so those are eggs of lady beetles, because lady beetles, different species of lady beetles, are avid hungry predators of the Crapemyrtle bark scale. There are three main species: the twice-tabbed lady beetle, the bigeminal lady beetle, which looks like the twice-tabbed, but is a completely different species, and also the non-native harlequin lady bee beetle. These species, they will find trees infested with the Crapemyrtle bar scale, and they will feed on nymphs and adults alike. Um, so they help, yes, they do help, but often they arrive too late in the season, and they are not specialists. They will feed on other prey, which means they will not stay for many generations on the tree, providing continuous control. And that is a problem. So this is my last question for you. If you have any idea of what is this. This, of course, is an egg from another predator that would happily feed on the crepe myrtle bar scale. Is called stalked egg. Is a beautiful egg of lacewings. One species in particular, the red-lipped green lacewing, it feeds and predates on Crapemyrtle bar scale nymphs and eggs as well. And you can see on the sequence on the right, this is a larvae of the lacewing, which are the most voracious. Lacewing, do they work? Yes, they are actually available commercially, of course, to control different pests, including CMBS. But the problem is they don't build up a population on the plant like the previous case. And also adults need to feed on sugar. And this means that you have to continuously through the season release. So is just one release at the beginning of the season is not enough. But they are available, they are commercially available, and they can be used. Of course, you need to do chemical control very carefully because it has a potential to initiate the biological control. At the same way as for the EAB, what we want in the future is a balance. We want the population of the scale low, because the community of natural enemy is healthy, but we want to use and we want to do additional research to find effective chemical control that maybe is more compatible with the natural enemy. Okay, this brings me to the last, I would say, 5-8 minutes, which is the last story in my presentation, which is a native tree impacted by native pests. And our example is the orange-striped oakworm moth. So this, of course, is a very well-known pest of oaks, especially red oaks in the group of the red oaks, but can feed on other plants, including hickory, birch, hazelnut, and maple. On the left is interesting because you can see that the skeletonizing damage is the one that is done by the baby larvae after hatching. And then as they grow, they start feeding on the entirety of the leaf lamina. And in some case, extreme case, especially for small trees, they can completely strip a tree. And this tree, the photo on the right, is in early August, and is a young but not super young tree. Is a willow oak that was completely defoliated. Okay, a little summary. I know a lot of you are already familiar with it. Is of course a late summer and fall season pest that overwinters as a pupa and produces in the south 2 generations per year. So we can start here. The adults, they mate, and the female lay eggs here on the underside of leaves in the late summer. And then young larvae, it initially feeds all together on the same branch where they hatched. And then as they grow, they disperse a little bit because they need a lot of leaves. And then again, they can defoliate. In some cases, they can defoliate completely a tree, but those cases are quite rare and exclusively for small trees. And at the end of the season, after, for example, for the south, the second generation is complete in the fall with the first cold. The larvae, they drop to the ground and they will pupate in the first 5 inch in the ground. Okay, so we can use our map as a tool to ask question. Okay, is a native pest, why it causes or can cause so much damage? What about the plant? What about the other factor we looked together earlier for the other two pests? First of all, of course, is a pest of particular relevance for urban and landscape trees and young trees. Why? Remember the disease triangle. What is the role of the plant? This is an example. A lot of the trees in urban environment are trees that come from the nursery, and so are often clonal trees. The genetic variability of those trees are very low. For example, an example on a UGA campus in Athens, there are a lot of beautiful Natal oaks. But those, they come from they are very high quality trees, but they are basically the same tree. And so the susceptibility is low of one tree means the susceptibility for all the tree on campus of the Natal oak is low. And so they are heavily attacked by the orange stripe oakworm moth. Okay, what about the environment? An example, again, yes, in urban environment, we have the problem of heat again, and we know that will stress trees, but will help the development of the orange stripe work moth as well. These are some of the reason why is can be a pest. Okay, what about natural enemies? So right now we know all the questions we should ask. Yes, there are natural enemies that are being described. We know of them. There are various predators that feed on larvae, for example, yellow jackets and other wasps. There are various parasitoids and fungal disease that they kill the pupae up to 10 or in some case 20% of the pupae, and there are a lot of parasitoids that parasitize the eggs. And this is important. This is an example on the picture on the left. This is the underside of pin oak leaf full of eggs from the orange stripe oakworm moth. But if we look closely, we see that some of those eggs are yellow. Those eggs are empty eggs. You can see the opening here on the side. They open like a wallet, and the baby larva already came out, so they hatched. But some other eggs, you can see this one, for example, the dark ones, they have a circular openings. That means has been parasitized. So that is a parasitoid. That is an egg parasitoid, a wasp that emerged from that egg. Okay, let's talk about control. So since this pest can be a pest, but in some cases the damage is not so high, it's important to understand the need for the control. First of all, we need to distinguish between aesthetic damage and actual damage for the plant. The threshold is around 25% of defoliation. And then we need to assess the season. Why? Because late defoliation, even if it's a very substantial defoliation but occurs late in the season, is not really harmful to the tree because the tree already store all the nutrients, and so it's not very harmful. So it's important to kind of judge the severity of the situation. What can we use though? So we can use BTK, Bacillus thuringiensis crustacea, as a foliar spray, which is effective, but mostly on young instar, of course, on young larvae, has a very little impact on natural enemy, which is good, but often needs to be reapplied. But there are also other options for contact and also systemic insecticides. I encourage you also here to take a look at the publication link to the QR code here if you are interested. With that, I came to the end of my presentation, and I hope I will be able to provide you some insight on what are the biological parameter and the ecological interaction you have to look at to understand what is the damage and the control that can be applied to a pest. With that, I think I will stop my sharing, and I will take any question you may have, and I will ask your help, Buddy, to summarize any question that came.
Thank you, Ignazio. That was great. Lots of really, really excellent information. There hasn't been a question in the chat. Just lots of really good comments. Thank you. I do want to mention something when you were talking about the crepe myrtle bark scale. Unfortunately, I have seen much expansion of the pest in landscapes, especially new landscapes, but even established landscapes. Um, I mean, I was in Savannah last year, same tree. At that height, there was no evidence. I mean, again, the tree was pretty high, but this year we were just there like 2 weeks ago, and it was right there. And it was a large tree too. And all across the areas around Atlanta that I have visited, pretty much, I would say maybe about 60-70% of plantings have evidence. So yeah, it's
Wow.
pretty bad. Yeah, we just have lots of really happy people. So thank you so much again. I know you stayed late to entertain us and share with us your expertise and knowledge. So have fun, be safe, and have a safe trip back to the U.S.
Thank you, Buddy. It was my pleasure. I really enjoyed it, and yeah, I'm looking forward to be in touch.
Thank you. Bye bye.
Thank you. Bye bye.
All right, everybody. Thanks for joining us again for the first one of these of this year. And we'll see everyone in March. And just make sure you get your sign-in sheets to us at gtbop@uga.edu. And if you need to mail those to us, you'll find that mailing address at the top of the sign-in sheet. I think
Thank
that's
you
it for
all.
me,
Thank you,
Bodie.
Richie.
I'm going to
Bye.
hang around for just a minute to make sure we don't have any procedural questions, but I'll see you soon, Bodie.
Alrighty.